I'm a professor of sociocultural anthropology at the university in Belgrade. Now I'm in retirement, professor emeritus, but I'm still working with postgraduate students and some kind of research. And just recently, I've done with some of my colleagues a research about the political and cultural problems of the citizens in the present-day Serbia, and that is why I'm speaking about a great problem of keeping a secular state nowadays, which was quite expecting from the citizens and people who are democratically oriented, because in October 2000 in Serbia it was turned over from a dictatorial autocratic state to democratic transition. But when I said that it is paradoxical nowadays, in this the process of democratic transition, society is becoming more and more clericalized, and people from the church, authorities from the church are becoming very influential to the politics in Serbia, and what has never been before, as far as I remember, now they involve themselves in any institution of Serbia. As far as the schools are concerned, the teaching of theology or clerical propaganda, I would say, is introduced in the state schools, you see. And then only NGOs are exception. They don't go to NGOs to influence, but as far as the government is concerned, or state institutions of any kind, church is there to give their opinions, responses, and to influence the government. So I think it is very problematic development nowadays. And what myself, people like myself who are really democratically oriented, write and speak in TV presentations, we say that it's okay for people to believe, but you cannot use governmental institution impose to everybody belief, everybody religious belief, because people can believe in some other things, not just religion. Unfortunately, the politics and church and the influence of church to politics is so interwoven, and they are becoming more and more influential. That is the reason why I'm very anxious about how my country, how Serbia, will come to the real democracy.
Is it just influence, or do they have legal status?
That's a good question. They say that's just their free influence, because everybody has freedom to declare their own beliefs, their own values, etc. But that's not just influence. That's interference into the politics. And according to the law of church and religious institutions, they got really the status of a new I should say, class or a new important part of the society. And what is quite wrong to my mind, and I spoke in those terms very critically in various conferences, the state and the government guarantees to the church that every free space in the town will be given to them to build the churches on the cost of the state. And then what is the more problematic, they are accepted from the responsibilities for what they are talking in their missions. And they are the most problematic. That is the problem that, as I said, they are accepted from the responsibility for what they are saying in their missions in the church. And they use the missions for political speech and for propaganda. And very often they say such things that they should be responsible and
for instance,
have some sanctions. For instance, they speak to people that everybody who doesn't believe are very problematic people and should be sentenced to some kind, you see, and they accuse them that they are not right people, they are not people who deserve respect, etc., etc., or sometimes they speak in favor of those who are sentenced for some crimes, political crimes. They speak about them as heroes, as people very respected, etc., etc. So really very reactionary propaganda, but they are not going to be sanctioned for that, because in those laws of church and religious institutions, they are expected for such responsibility.
What you are saying is that the church is supporting the perpetrators of the wars against Bosnia and Kosovo. What you are saying is that the church is praising, supporting those who were responsible for the wars in Bosnia and Kosovo.
As far as Kosovo is concerned, I don't think the church in Serbia is much interested in what is going in Kosovo, in this Bosnia. But as far as Kosovo is concerned, they are very resolute to support, unfortunately, the existing government in Serbia, which is very much nationalistic and clericalistic, and they support those things that Kosovo should be the part of Serbia, and Serbian people and government should do everything to keep it in their in the framework of Serbia. Unfortunately, Kosovo has not been part of Serbia almost for 15 years, but they are using also the religious institutions to propagate that even the war should be started if Americans or European Union decided to separate Kosovo from Serbia. And they create very disagreeable and dangerous situation in Serbia.
Well, what are the consequences on women?
You mean in the nowadays politics? As a matter of fact, I would say that women are getting better position than they used to have before. You see, we have to take into account two periods of the development of Serbia. One is when Serbia was a part of ex-Yugoslavia. At that time, women had a rather acceptable position, I mean, not in politics, but in professional. For example, I was the first professor of anthropology at the Department of Sociology as a woman. Nobody had I had no problem. And what was the most important thing? Women was quite equal to men according to the salaries they got for the same job. There were no differences between. That was a very important thing. But
and you also had access to reproductive rights. You also had reproductive rights.
And that was important. Reproductive rights, and women expected the baby had right to stop the working for 1 year, getting the full salary, which is different now.
And with the influence of the church, what is the difference for women?
As far as the church, or you mean the relationship between? There is a great difference nowadays for the worse, I would say, because at that first period, and even during the during 90s, women were not so religious. They were mostly engaged or occupied with the problem of how to exist, how to keep their families, their children, to educate their children. But nowadays, churches are full with women, particularly with the women. I would say mostly peasant women, mostly less educated women, but still, women are the mostly kept by the propaganda of the church. So the difference is towards the worst situation.
Have laws changed under the influence of the state for women?
As far as the law is concerned, there is the law saying that women have equal rights in politics, in professional life, etc., etc. But that's the law. The problem in Serbia that we have some good laws, although we have some not good laws, but some good laws, and this is good law, even saying that a positive differentiation should be kept in order to have some proportion of women in the political institutions and organizations. But the problem is that nobody keeps to behave according to the law. The government doesn't care much for realizing the law. So we have the state on the paper or in the paragraphs as democratic state with keeping how to say that in English, Staatsrecht. You know what does it mean. There is no real adequate term in English to keep in the line of laws, and that's declared. But the problem is that they don't keep in practice in the line of laws. So, of course, there are more women in the parliament nowadays, there are more women, not much more, but there are some women as the ministers or the councillors of the ministers in the government nowadays, but the proportion is not kept rightly. Still, there are more women now in politics, and some are rather influential. The consequences would be not only for women, but for the whole population, because the consequences will be very great as far as sciences are concerned. As anthropology, sociology, law, science of law, because they will be interpreted in the sense which are not modern. And then, including the women, the consequences will be that they will not be stimulated to fight for their rights, but just to keep silent and go to church and ask from the God or somebody else to help them, instead of motivating them to fight for their own rights.